18th of June, 11th Sunday in Ordinary Time. Sermon on Matthew chapter 9, verses 35 to chapter 10, verse 10. When Jesus came to our earth, he came to demonstrate the power of God's kingdom. And so he healed those who were blind, or sick, or paralysed, or suffering from many other ills. He raised the dead and he fed the hungry. But that was not to be his primary work. In our reading today, we meet Jesus fulfilling the role for which he had become a man, coming to our earth and sharing our lives. He had come to bring salvation. Ultimately, of course, he achieved this by dying for us on the cross, purchasing reconciliation for us with his own blood. However, during his short 3-year ministry, Jesus needed to make disciples so that there would be people to carry his message when he was no longer there. Jesus could have died to save us, but if no one knew and understood what he had done, if no one could take the good news from town to town and country to country, so that eventually the message would be known worldwide, then the Christian faith would have died with Jesus. We ourselves would be living in ignorance and without hope. There would be no church, no Christians. And so Jesus took his gospel out into the communities. Earlier in this chapter, Jesus had healed a paralysed man who was lowered down to him through a hole in the roof. He'd called Matthew to be his follower, answered the Pharisees when they questioned him about eating with sinners and about fasting. He'd healed a woman with a hemorrhage, raised a dead girl, restored sight to 2 blind men, and released another man who was possessed by a demon that had rendered him mute. But now we see Jesus preaching the gospel. We're told that Jesus went through the towns and villages, teaching in the synagogues and preaching the good news, the gospel of the kingdom. And to reinforce his teaching, to demonstrate his authority, he healed every sickness and disease. The good news was for everlasting life, but it's for life now too. When Jesus saw the crowds, he felt compassion for them. Jesus wasn't just doing his duty in coming to earth and preaching the gospel. He wanted to reach people's hearts and minds, give them hope for this present life, as well as for the future. What someone has rather vulgarly called pie in the sky when you die, rather steak on the plate while you wait. I'm a vegetarian and I don't want steak anywhere near my plate, but I appreciate the sentiment all the same. I don't just want to be looking forward to the end of my life when I go to be with the Lord. I don't want to wish away my present life. I want to reap the joys of the Christian faith now, even in the midst of all the troubles that beset us in this world. Jesus felt that the crowds were like sheep without a shepherd, harassed and helpless. His heart must have gone out to them. That's a good description of how many are today, without hope, feeling lost, concerned for the future and fearful of what it might hold. However, knowledge of the gospel can transcend all that and give real hope and comfort. Many feel transformed when they come to a knowledge of Christ and turn to him for salvation. However, Jesus was concerned that not enough would hear the gospel. He spoke to the disciples about the crowds whom he compared to a harvest field. The harvest could be plentiful, but there were not enough workers to gather it in. He needed more. And so Jesus commissioned his 12 closest disciples to take on the work of disseminating the gospel. He gave them authority to heal and to expel demons. They were to go first to the people of Israel, for it was the nation of Israel who had been God's chosen people, the people among whom the Messiah was expected. For that reason, now that the Messiah was here, they were to be privileged as the first to respond to the kingdom message, to be the foundation stones of the spiritual temple that was to be the church. Therefore Jesus gave instructions to his disciples not to go to the Gentiles or the Samaritans, though their chance was to come. They were to declare that the kingdom of heaven was near, and, like Jesus, they were to heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse lepers, and drive out demons. They were to give as freely and as generously as they themselves had received. But they were to trust that those they met along the way would provide them with their needs. So they were not to take money, extra clothes or sandals, not even as staff. If they discharged their duty, they would find that they were provided for as they journeyed. Times have changed, and we don't tell people about Jesus in the same way as did those first disciples. Communities are different. It's unlikely that if we went out to share the gospel, that people would now offer us food and accommodation, as Jesus expected people to do then. Not many of us would see a staff as an essential item of equipment. I think it would be a mobile phone now. However, human nature has not changed, and the world is still a troubled place, probably more at risk now than it was then. People are afraid to consider the future with the threats that exist to world peace, the problems of pollution, climate change, widespread poverty and general instability. And so we Christians need to be messengers of hope, to preach about the kingdom. We should not be reticent about the kingdom, uncertain about what it means, for it was the core of the message that Jesus and his disciples preached when they said, "The kingdom of heaven is near." The kingdom is where God's will is done, where people are made whole, given hope, helped to overcome their fears. It's not complete yet, but we can still be members of that kingdom now. And when Jesus returns, as he surely will, the kingdom will reign in its fullness, achieving all that Jesus demonstrated during his ministry, ending pain, sickness, suffering, and death itself. Our earth will be restored, and the whole world will be full of the knowledge of God as the waters cover the sea. That must be our message as we reach out now to the lost, helping them with their needs, but giving ultimate hope for their future.